The smoke from the ruined ship curled into the sky like a dark ribbon. Jack stood on the edge of the broken hull, his hand shielding his eyes as he looked out across the strange landscape. This planet wasn't on any map. His pod had crash-landed after a freak energy surge during a hyperspace jump. Now all he had was a damaged cum, a survival bag, and the burning heat of the alien sun. The ground was cracked like dried clay, stretching for miles. Sharp rock towers pierced the horizon, and red banners fluttered in the distance. Something was off. There were no animals, no wind, and yet Jack could feel he was being watched. He took slow steps forward, staying close to the wreckage. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was loaded. A strange tremor pulsed through the air, and the stones at his feet vibrated. Then, a deep hum echoed around him, like a chant carried by the earth itself. Jack turned. On the highest step of the nearby platform, something enormous was kneeling. His breath caught in his throat when he saw her. She was massive, easily 12 feet tall. Her skin was smooth and lavender-colored, and her eyes glowed gold like twin stars. She had 6 arms, each moving slowly with grace. Long white hair flowed over her armored shoulders, and her wings were folded neatly behind her. She looked like a goddess carved from moonlight. The alien girl tilted her head. She spoke in a language Jack didn't understand, but her voice was rich and powerful, filled with emotion. She pointed toward him, then toward the sky. Her lips trembled slightly, and she dropped to both knees, arms raised high in what looked like praise. Jack's heart pounded. She thought he was someone else, or something else. Maybe this planet had legends. Maybe her people believed in sky gods, and with the way he fell from the sky, fire trailing behind, maybe she really believed he was divine. The thought made his stomach twist. The alien girl spoke again, louder this time. Her people began to appear from the shadows, tall figures with the same glowing eyes and 4 or 6 arms. They knelt behind her, whispering and staring at Jack. The girl reached forward, palm up, offering her hand. It trembled with expectation. Jack stepped back, unsure what to do. Every instinct screamed for caution, but there was something about her eyes, her posture, that told him she meant no harm. She wasn't threatening, she was begging. But why? Why him? Why now? He couldn't even fix a broken radio, let alone lead a people. Suddenly, she touched her chest, then gestured toward the horizon. She turned her head, revealing the mountains in the distance, where black clouds now boiled. Lightning cracked the sky, and distant horns howled. Something terrible was coming. She looked back at Jack and said one word with tears in her voice. Zarin. He didn't know what it meant, but it struck something deep in his bones. Then, with deliberate motion, she stood tall. The others followed, lifting weapons, curved blades, spears, staffs of glowing metal. The giant girl turned, looked back at him, and spread her 6 arms wide, like she was inviting him to witness something sacred. Jack followed as she led him up the temple steps. The higher they climbed, the clearer the view of the burning mountains became. Explosions flashed in the distance, and flying machines zipped through the clouds. This planet wasn't quiet anymore. It was preparing for war. At the top of the structure, a massive stone table was carved with old markings. The girl stood beside it, placed her hands on the stone, and muttered words that sounded like prayers. Then she looked at Jack and gestured for him to come forward. He hesitated, but her eyes were full of trust, not command. As he stepped up, she removed a medallion from her neck and placed it over his. It glowed the moment it touched his skin. A soft wind blew around him, though. The air had been still seconds before. The people behind them chanted louder, voices rising in rhythm with the storm brewing ahead. Jack looked down at the medallion. A symbol pulsed in its center, matching the pattern on the banners fluttering across the ruins. Somehow the necklace was syncing with his body, reading his energy. or maybe even enhancing it. His fingertips tingled. He suddenly felt stronger, lighter, more aware. The alien girl knelt again, her many hands pressed together like a prayer. Her voice rose above the others as she shouted more words Jack couldn't understand, but he knew what she was saying. She was offering something, or maybe asking something. He saw it in her eyes. She needed him. Then, in the far sky, black-winged creatures appeared. Giant, armored beasts riding storms and fire. The alien girl stood and spread her arms in front of Jack, shielding him as if he were precious. Her voice dropped to a whisper, and she said one word again. Zarin. Jack whispered back, not the same word, but a promise. I'm not a god, he said, but I'll try to help you. Asterisk. The alien girl stood tall with her wings stretched wide, her 6 arms lifted as if calling the wind to her. Behind her, her people raised their weapons to the sky. Jack stood among them, uncertain but no longer afraid. The medallion on his chest glowed with a soft pulse that matched the beat of his heart. Her people called her Sireya. At least, that's what it sounded like when the others spoke her name in hushed tones. Sireya seemed to be a leader, maybe a priestess, maybe a queen. She spoke with confidence, moved like a warrior, and looked at Jack like he was something sacred. They led him through the ruins of the city, where buildings were carved into the cliffs and flags marked every archway. Children peeked from behind columns. Elders pressed their foreheads to the ground as he passed. Jack felt like an imposter walking among them, but no one doubted him, not even Sireya. They brought him to a hall where the walls were covered in glowing paintings. Strange stars and shapes spun across the stone as if alive. One image caught his eye, a figure falling from the sky surrounded by fire, landing in front of a woman with wings. The resemblance was too close to ignore. Sireya walked beside him and placed one hand gently on his shoulder. Then, using a glowing crystal, she projected an image in the air. It showed black ships descending, war beasts marching, and burning cities. She pointed to the ships, then to Jack, then tapped the medallion. Her message was clear. He was their only hope. Jack didn't know how to tell her the truth. He was just a mechanic, not a soldier, not a leader. But the way her people looked at him gave him pause. They believed in him. Maybe belief was stronger than truth. Maybe he didn't need to be a god, just someone willing to stand with them. That night, a feast was held beneath the stars. Fires burned in metal bowls, and drums echoed through the hills. Sireya sat beside him, dressed in golden robes and jewelry that shimmered like starlight. She looked at him with a mix of respect and curiosity, like she was still trying to understand him. She spoke slowly, using gestures and simple sounds to explain. Jack tried to reply, and with time they found ways to communicate. He learned the names of a few things. Veil meant sky, Torika meant enemy, Zale meant light. And then she touched his chest again and repeated her word for him, Zarin. He pointed to himself. Jack, he said. She smiled. Zarin. Jack, she repeated, like she was giving him a title. The others around the fire chanted it afterward, their voices rising together. Jack felt a strange warmth grow in his chest, not from the fire, but from the way they looked at him like he mattered. Suddenly, horns sounded in the distance. The music stopped. Warriors grabbed their weapons. Sireya stood instantly, wings flaring. She gave orders with hand signals, and her people moved with speed and purpose. Jack followed her to the edge of the cliff, where glowing eyes flickered in the darkness. Torek scouts had entered the valley. They rode shadow beasts with long claws and burning red eyes. Sireya raised one hand, and her archers drew bows of light. With a single wave, she unleashed a volley. The scouts fell, but more followed. The attack had begun. Sireya turned to Jack and pointed toward the mountain temple. She said something with urgency, then pressed the medallion on his chest. The energy pulsed harder, and suddenly his mind opened. Visions poured in. He saw battles, commands, strategy. The medallion wasn't just a symbol. It was a link to their past leaders. Images showed a Zaran leading from the front, standing between death and his people. Soraya's face appeared in those memories too. Always beside him, a protector, a partner. Jack gritted his teeth. If they needed him to be that, he would try. Not because he was a god, but because she believed he could be. The warriors marched toward the front line. Jack climbed the temple to see the battlefield clearly. Soraya landed beside him, her wings folding. Her voice was calm but firm as she spoke to the captains. Her 6 arms moved like lightning, drawing maps in the air with glowing dust. Jack began to understand. The medallion helped him read patterns, see troop positions, and sense enemy movements. He gave a signal, unsure if it was correct, but the captains obeyed. Soraya looked at him and nodded, the faintest smile on her lips as if to say he was learning. The first clash rang out below. Alien metal slammed against bone and fire. Screams echoed. Explosions lit up the night. Jack watched, heart racing. His mind screamed to run, but his feet stayed rooted. He raised one fist to signal another wave. He wasn't sure if it was courage or madness. Soraya launched into the sky with a roar that shook the ground. Her people followed, soaring like silver. Angels. Jack saw her strike down one of the beast riders with a single blow. The way she moved was art-fierce, elegant, perfect. She was more than a warrior. She was a living storm. When the battle slowed, Jack descended the steps and met the wounded. He helped lift broken weapons, carried a child with a burnt arm, and comforted those who had lost family. The people whispered Zaran as he passed, not like a title now, but like a name they trusted. Soraya returned at dawn, her body scraped and bloodied, but her eyes still burning bright. She walked straight to Jack, dropped to one knee, and bowed her head. Then she stood and spoke 5 words in his language, simple, clear, no mistake. You must rule with me. Jack stared at her in silence. The words echoed in his head like thunder. You must rule with me. He wasn't sure what shocked him more, her speaking English, or the fact that she just asked him to rule her people. Soraya waited, tall and graceful, her golden eyes never blinking. He looked around at the people gathered near the base of the temple. They were wounded, exhausted, and yet still hopeful. They looked at him not with fear or doubt, but with belief. Jack felt the weight of that belief pressing on his shoulders like heavy armor. He wasn't ready for this, but maybe he needed to be. I don't know your world, Jack said slowly, pointing to the burning horizon. I don't know your customs, your gods, or even your enemies. He stepped closer to Soraya and placed a hand on her arm. But I know how to fight when it matters. I won't let them take your home. Soraya tilted her head, her lips curving in a small smile. She touched the medallion on his chest again, and this time, her fingers lingered. The connection surged through him like lightning. His vision flickered, showing glimpses of the past council chamber, 2 thrones side by side, and a goddess offering her hand to a man who looked like him. Her people began preparing the city. Walls were reinforced, supplies gathered, and warriors trained day and night. Jack learned quickly. The medallion let him absorb knowledge faster than normal. Soraya trained with him herself, teaching him their martial signals, weapon forms, and ancient battle dances that called on celestial power. He watched how she moved, every step firm, every swing precise. When she trained, she did not hold back. She treated him like a warrior, not a symbol. When he failed, she corrected him. When he succeeded, she nodded without praise. Jack respected her for that. She didn't want a god. She wanted a partner. Together, they walked the ruins of the outer city. Soraya showed him the scars of the last war, the place where her brother fell, the tower where her mother had once ruled. These ruins weren't just stone. They were memories, sacred and painful. Jack listened carefully, saying little, but feeling everything. At night, they sat beside a sacred flame. Soraya drew constellations in the air, naming them one by one. Each star had a name, a history, a hero tied to it. Then she pointed to a new star in the sky, bright, flickering, recently appeared. She called it Torazan, which meant the new flame. She gestured toward Jack and whispered his name, then pointed to the new star again. He understood. She believed he was written into their fate. Maybe the moment he fell from the sky wasn't random. Maybe their myths were waiting for someone like him to arrive in the time of need. The enemy returned with greater force. The skies turned dark as massive ships hovered over the peaks. This time they didn't send scouts, they sent full battalions. Huge monsters in black armor, with metal hounds that howled as they hunted. Tauret banners covered the mountains like a storm. Spreading across the land, Soraya called her war council. Jack stood beside her at the head of the table. Captains, scholars, and scouts all waited for his words. He didn't speak like a king or a god. He spoke like a soldier. He told them what he had learned, what he feared, and what they could do. Together, they agreed on a desperate plan. A surprise attack into enemy territory. If they could destroy the lead war machine, the enemy lines would fall into confusion. Soraya would lead the airstrike, and Jack would guide the ground forces through the abandoned tunnels below the mountain. It was dangerous, but it was their only chance. The night before the mission, Jack stood on the temple balcony, looking at the stars. Soraya joined him quietly. She said nothing at first, just placed her many hands over his. Her touch was warm, steady. After a moment, she said his name in a soft voice, then looked into his eyes. "You are not just Zareen," she sighed. "You are my equal." Then she lifted a golden band and offered it to him. "This means you lead beside me. No lies, no pretending. Our people rise together or fall together." Jack took the band and slowly slid it over his wrist. In the silence that followed, the flames around the temple rose higher. The people saw the signal. The time for battle had come. Drums began to beat. Horns howled across the cliffs. The banners of her people, now marked with a star for him, rose into the smoky wind. As they marched, Jack passed warriors who had once doubted him. Now they bowed their heads. Children reached out to touch his hands. Elders whispered blessings. Soraya walked beside him, tall and proud. Together, they looked like legends in motion, stepping into the stories the stars would one day tell. They reached the base of the tunnels. The scouts had already cleared the first section. Jack led a team of 20 while Soraya soared ahead with her wings and aerial strike group. The medallion pulsed against his chest, guiding his steps like it knew where the danger was hiding. Inside the tunnels, strange lights flickered. Old traps still hummed. Jack moved with care, every breath measured. The enemy had left surprises, but he disarmed them with help from the memories shared through the medallion. It was like ancient minds were helping him from beyond. They reached the heart of the mountain. The giant war engine stood like a beast made of iron and hatred. It throbbed with energy, surrounded by guards. Jack signaled to his warriors. They split into squads and took positions. Then, with a single flare shot from his wrist launcher, the battle began. The first blast rocked the cavern walls. Jack ducked behind a metal pillar as shards of broken armor flew past his face. The enemy had seen the flare. The Torak soldiers roared and charged, weapons pulsing with red energy. Jack gritted his teeth and raised his own weapon. He wasn't a trained marksman, but he had steady hands and a sharp mind. He waited for the right moment, then fired at the exposed fuel core on the nearest beast. The explosion lit up the cavern, dropping 3 soldiers instantly. His warriors moved in, blades glowing with alien light. They fought hard. The Torak forces were brutal, but Soraya's people had heart. Jack kept moving between squads, calling out positions, pointing out weak spots. The medallion helped him sense danger. pulsing stronger when enemies were near. It was more than a tool. It was his link to their legacy. Above them, the mountain trembled. Soraya was attacking from the sky. Bright beams of energy flashed through the cracks in the ceiling. Every time the thunder roared above, the enemy paused. In fear, her name echoed across the battlefield like a blessing of war. "Soraya!" they shouted. "Soraya flies!" Jack reached the base of the war engine. The machine towered above them, humming with energy. Pipes glowed with red light, and massive gears turned slowly like the breathing of a giant. He called for charges to be set, and his engineers ran forward with glowing bricks of explosive gel. Suddenly, a massive Torak commander stepped into the light. Taller than Jack by 2 heads, its armor looked like obsidian fused with bone. Its weapon had a rotating barrel with fire running through it. The creature snarled and pointed straight at Jack. The ground burned beneath its feet. Jack didn't. "Back away." He pulled a blade from his belt and stepped forward. His warriors froze in place, unsure if he was serious. But Jack's eyes locked with the beast. He wasn't just trying to win the fight. He was protecting a people who had given him a name and a place. The beast attacked with a swing that cracked the stone. Jack rolled under it and slashed at its legs. Sparks flew. He climbed the creature's back and drove the blade into its neck. Joint! It roared and slammed him into a wall. Blood filled Jack's mouth, but he stood again with fire in his chest. He charged again. This time he didn't think. He trusted the rhythm of the medallion, the training Soraya had forced into his muscles, and the belief in his heart. The blade found its mark. The commander fell with a scream that shook the ceiling. Jack stood over it with burning lungs and shaking hands. The engineers finished setting the charges. Jack gave the signal. They all turned and ran as the timer began to count down. The roar of the mountain grew louder, rocks falling like rain from above. Jack barely cleared the tunnel entrance before the explosion ripped through the earth. A pillar of fire shot into the sky. The mountain cracked open like an egg, and the war engine was torn in half. Soraya flew down through the smoke and landed beside Jack. Her wings were scorched, and her dress was torn, but she was alive. She looked at him with wide eyes. "You did it," she whispered. "Zarin, you destroyed their heart." Jack didn't answer. He simply collapsed against a rock, breathing hard, looking up at the burning sky. Her people cheered in the distance, but all he could hear was the pounding of his heartbeat in his ears. They returned to the city as heroes. Soraya's people lined the streets with glowing petals. Drums beat a slow rhythm of triumph. Warriors raised their swords in the air, and children ran ahead to touch Jack's hands. He didn't feel like a god, but he walked tall beside her. At the temple steps, Soraya held his wrist and raised it to the crowd. "Zarin Jack," she shouted. "Breaker of steel. Chosen by the sky. Shield of the last flame." The people repeated the words. Some cried. Some fell to their knees. Jack just stared at her, trying to understand the depth of her faith. That night, under the stars, she came to him again. No armor. No crown, just Soraya. She sat beside him in silence, then placed her hand on his chest. "We are not finished," she said. "The war engine is gone, but their queen will come. She will bring fire, and she will not believe you are one of us." Jack nodded slowly. "Then we'll show her," Soraya smiled. "Not as God and servant, as rulers together." She held out her hand. He took it without hesitation. Their fingers locked, and the stars above seemed to shine brighter for a moment. Not from magic, from meaning. In the days that followed, they trained harder. Soraya taught Jack their oldest combat arts. He learned to move like her, strike like her, and fly using energy wings drawn from the medallion. He still stumbled sometimes, but she never lost faith. She would whisper, "You rise faster than you fall." Scouts returned with reports. The enemy queen was on the move. Her ship was larger than anything they had seen before, a living fortress. Black smoke trailed behind it. Cities in its path were already burning. Her army carried banners made of bones and metal. The final battle was coming. Saraya and Jack stood on the high tower, looking out at the valley below. Their warriors gathered. Every face was hard, but not afraid. These people had known loss, but now they had hope. They had leaders who stood beside them, not above them. Jack turned to Saraya. "I'm ready," he said. She looked at him, her golden eyes steady. "Then let us show the stars what we were born to do." Thunder rolled over the valley as the sky darkened. The enemy queen's fortress ship appeared on the horizon like a mountain made of metal and hate. It flew slowly, deliberately, casting a shadow so wide it covered the land in a second skin of fear. Jack stood on the highest tower with Saraya at his side. Her people gathered below, thousands strong. Warriors, scouts, medics, engineers all wore the crest of the flame and the star. They didn't shout or cheer. They stood in silence, facing death with calm faces. Jack felt a strange mix of pride and dread. He had led them to this final moment. Saraya placed her hand on his chest and looked into his eyes. "Do not speak like a god," she said. "Speak like Jack," he nodded. Then he turned to the army and raised his fist. "I'm not a legend," he shouted. "I'm just someone who decided not to run. You gave me a place. Now I fight for it." The warriors lifted their blades. No words, just steel and fire. It was enough. The ground trembled as the fortress drew near. Mechanical legs extended from its sides and anchored it into the earth. Giant doors opened in the belly of the beast, and the queen's army poured out like a swarm. They came in lines, armored in bone and shadow. Monsters with blade limbs, creatures made of molten stone, and black-cloaked assassins who moved without sound. At the center of it all was the queen. She stepped out, taller than even Saraya, with 6 burning red eyes and a cloak of living metal. Jack watched her from the tower. The medallion on his chest burned hotter now, warning him. The enemy queen carried no weapon. She didn't need one. Her voice could crush will. Her gaze could break courage. Saraya gritted her teeth and spread her wings. "We fly now," she said. The sky filled with wings as Saraya and her elite guard took to the air. Jack and the ground forces moved forward through the trenches. The first clash sent shockwaves through the valley. Fire, light, and screaming metal mixed in a storm of battle. Jack fought with blade in mind. The medallion pulsed harder with every strike. It warned him of danger, guided his steps, and even shared flashes of Saraya's location. She danced through the sky like a streak of lightning, blades slicing through winged beasts. But the queen was still untouched. She waited behind her army like a spider in her web. Jack's warriors pushed forward, inch by inch. The battle was brutal. Screams filled the air. Earth cracked beneath their feet. Fires spread across the field, but Jack didn't stop. He moved like the heartbeat of the resistance, shouting orders, saving lives, and carving a path toward the center. At last the moment came. The queen stepped forward, her 6 eyes locking on Jack. Her voice rang out across the battlefield in a language he didn't know, but her intent was clear. She didn't recognize him as a threat. She saw him as a lie, a joke. A fake flame in the dark. He stepped forward anyway. Saraya landed beside him, bruised but still strong. "Together," she said. Jack nodded. The queen raised her arms, and the ground cracked open. A beast made of stone and chains crawled out, its mouth filled with smoke and blades. It charged straight at them. Jack ran first. He didn't wait for a sign. He jumped onto the beast's back and drove his blade into its spine. Saraya flew above and sliced through its armor. Together, they brought it down with fire from both sides. The ground shook as it fell. The queen blinked for the first time. She raised one hand and fired a beam of red light. Jack barely rolled aside as the ground exploded. He looked up to see Soraya charging into the sky, facing the queen alone. Their swords clashed in midair, lighting up the heavens. Jack knew she needed more than skill. She needed him. He climbed the broken remains of the beast and jumped. The medallion flared. Wings of blue energy burst from his back. He rose into the sky like a comet, caught the queen from behind, and pulled her down with all his weight. The three of them crashed to the ground in a wave of dust. The queen roared and threw Jack aside. Soraya landed hard, gasping but alive. Jack stood again, blade shaking in his hand. "You're done," he said. The queen charged. Jack didn't move. He closed his eyes and let the medallion guide him. At the last moment, he stepped left and struck. The blade pierced her chest. She screamed, her voice tearing the air like thunder. Soraya leaped and drove her sword into the queen's neck. Together, they dropped her to the dirt. Her army stopped moving. Without her, they had no mind, no will. They collapsed like puppets without strings. Silence filled the valley. Smoke drifted into the sky. Soraya turned to Jack, face covered in ash. "It is finished," she whispered. Jack looked at her, still breathing hard. He looked around at the wounded, the fallen, the sky slowly clearing. He didn't speak. He just took her hand. Their people emerged from hiding. The warriors raised their blades once more, not in war, but in honor. The banners were lifted again, stained but whole. The flames still burned. And at the center of it all stood two figures, one from the stars, one from the soil, both crowned by fire and faith, asterisk. The battlefield was quiet now. Only the wind moved, carrying smoke and ash across the broken land. The enemy queen's body lay still beneath the collapsed stone. Jack stood beside it, chest rising and falling with slow, heavy breaths. His blade was cracked. His hands were cut. But he was standing. Soraya moved closer and looked at him, not as a warrior, not as a commander, but as the man she had chosen. Her eyes no longer held command or question. They held respect. Her wings hung low, torn but proud. She touched his cheek gently and said one word, "Home." Their people gathered around them. No cheers, no wild celebration. Just quiet strength. They looked at Jack like they were seeing him for the first time, not as a god, not as a prophecy, but as someone real. Someone who had bled beside them, fought beside them, and survived. They carried the wounded first. No one was left behind. Jack helped lift a child into a medic's arms and held the hand of a dying soldier as she whispered her family's name. Soraya did the same. She knelt with the broken, gave water to the weak, and offered silence when no words would help. When they reached the city, the fires had already been put out. The banners were raised higher. The temple was lit with hundreds of blue flames. The people moved slowly through the streets, touching the walls, holding hands, and laying flowers in places where blood had dried. At the heart of the temple, the council waited. Elders, warriors, mothers, and scholars stood around a single stone seat. It had been empty for many years. The throne of their people, meant only for those chosen by fire. Soraya stepped forward and placed her hand on it. Then she turned to Jack. The room fell silent. Her voice was calm and steady. "Our law says one cannot rule alone," she said. "To carry the flame, two must share its weight." She reached for his wrist and lifted it. "He is not a god. He is not from this soil, but he bled for us. And he chose us." Jack looked at her, then at the people. He stepped forward and placed his hand on the stone beside hers. The flames in the temple rose higher. The medallion on his chest glowed one last time, then faded, its work complete. No crown was placed. No oath was spoken. But the people knew. For 3 days the city mourned and rebuilt. Warriors were honored. Families were reunited. Names of the fallen were etched into the stone walls of the temple. Jack spent most of those Days among the workers, lifting broken beams, hammering support posts, and listening to stories. Soraya stood with him, not above. She refused any special treatment. When the children offered her food, she sat with them and ate from the same bowls. When elders asked questions, she answered with honesty. Jack followed her lead. He learned that real strength came in simple acts. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned violet, Soraya and Jack walked alone through the quiet garden behind the temple. The grass was soft. The trees shimmered with light. She stopped by a small pool and sat on a stone bench. Jack sat beside her without speaking. "You could leave now," she said softly. "The war is over. The skies are open. You don't have to stay." Jack didn't answer right away. He watched the water ripple, saw his reflection beside hers. Then he spoke slowly. "I came here by accident, but I stayed by choice." Soraya smiled. "Then stay again, not as Zaren, just as Jack." He nodded. There was no ceremony, no grand moment. Just two people who had survived something terrible and chose to build something better. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and the stars watched in silence. The city grew stronger with each passing season. New homes were built deeper in the cliffs. Watchtowers lined the hills. Peace returned not because the enemy was gone, but because hope had taken root. The people no longer whispered of gods. They spoke of leaders who walked among them. Jack found a purpose he had never known before. He taught what he could repair, defense, survival, but he also learned their ways. He spoke their language with pride. He danced in their festivals. He helped plant trees and raise walls. And every evening he returned to Soraya's side. They ruled not by fear, but by example. When a child fell, Jack picked them up. When the harvest failed, Soraya worked the field with her hands. Their throne was not a place of distance. It was a seat shared between hearts that beat for the same people. The same future. On the first anniversary of the final battle, the stars burned bright. A new constellation had formed, shaped like twin wings around a flame. The people named it Zaren. Not for the legend, but for the man who had become one of them. The sky remembered, and so did they. The air was still as morning light touched the tops of the stone towers. A soft breeze carried the scent of fresh blooms through the temple gardens. Jack stood on a balcony carved into the mountain, hands resting on the cool stone railing. Below, the city moved with calm purpose. Today marked a full cycle since he fell from the sky. 1 year since the crash that should have ended his life instead led to something greater. He had arrived as a stranger. He had been mistaken for a god. But what he found was more than myth or destiny. He had found a home. Soraya joined him without a word. Her golden eyes scanned the valley, watching children play in the streets and elders tend the fires. She stood tall beside him, her long hair braided with silver threads, the same color as the clouds drifting overhead. When she looked at him, she smiled. "Do you remember your first words to me?" she asked. Jack chuckled. "I think I said, 'I'm not a god,' while trying not to faint." Soraya laughed gently. "And still, you stood beside me when it mattered." She reached out and touched his wrist where the golden band still rested. They walked together to the temple's central circle, where a gathering of voices rose in soft harmony. It was a song of thanks, not just for peace, but for unity. Children stood at the center with painted faces, reenacting the moment of the final battle. Jack stood quietly as the story played out. A young boy wearing a cloak of blue light stepped forward, pretending to be Jack. A girl with crafted wings danced around him as Soraya. The crowd clapped as the children mimicked the final strike against the enemy queen. Then the youngest child held up a small medallion made of clay. The boy raised it high, repeating the words Jack had spoken 1 year ago. "I'm not a legend. I just decided not to run." The crowd applauded, but not in wild noise. It was the sound of 1,000 hearts beating in the same rhythm. Jack felt something stir in his chest. Later that night, the fires were lit in spiral across the cliffs. The city became a sea of glowing blue, green, and gold. The stars above blinked through a clear sky. From every home and tower, people sang, not a war song, a song of future, of rebuilding, of choosing each other again and again. Jack stood beside Saraya at the highest point of the temple. Below them, the people looked up. They didn't bow. They didn't kneel. They just raised their hands in quiet greeting. A gesture of respect shared between equals. Jack lifted his hand in return, humbled by the simplicity of it. Saraya stepped forward and raised her voice so that all could hear. Tonight we speak not of the past. We speak of what we will grow, what we will protect, what we will become. Her voice rang clear, filled with hope and strength. Then she turned to Jack and reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation. Side by side, they stepped down the stairs, not toward a throne, but toward the people. Warriors, farmers, builders, and children reached out to touch their arms. Jack bent down and lifted a child into his arms. The boy smiled and whispered, "Thank you for staying." The stars shifted above them. The new constellation glowed brighter, now named in both of their honor. One part for the flame, one part for the wing. Together, it formed the shape of a rising phoenix, a symbol that meant rebirth and protection in both languages. The sky had remembered them. Days turned into seasons. The city grew into a beacon for others. Lost travelers, broken fleets, and exiled tribes came seeking refuge. Jack welcomed them with open hands. Saraya met them with open arms. Their city was no longer a place of survival. It had become a place of beginning. Jack never forgot where he came from. The stars still whispered of home. But when others asked if he missed Earth, he simply said, "I found something better." He never claimed to be a god again. But he walked with the strength of someone who had earned the love of a people. Saraya often teased him for still being awkward with certain customs. But she also reminded him that the people didn't want him to change. They wanted him to be exactly what he was: honest, brave, flawed, human. In return, he learned to see her not as a symbol, but as a person with fears and dreams. In quiet moments, they sat by the water's edge and talked about what they would build next. Not palaces, not monuments, but libraries, gardens, schools, places where no one would be forgotten, where no child would grow up thinking they were unworthy of love or safety. One morning, as sunlight poured over the hills, a new path was carved through the valley. It led to the place where Jack first landed. The wreck of his escape pod still rested there, cleaned and preserved. Visitors came to see it, not to worship, but to remember what began with fire and fear. And so the story passed from one mouth to another, not the story of a god, but of a man who arrived broken and was made whole by the hands of strangers. A man who chose not to run, who listened, learned, and stayed. A man who ruled not because he was powerful, but because he cared. In time, legends would fade and rise again. But in that city of stone and flame, two names would never be forgotten. One from the stars, one from the soil. Written not in prophecy, but in the hearts of those who lived, because they dared to believe in something greater than fear.